For 10 years, I quietly paid for all my grandchildren's extravagant birthday parties and was always there when my son's family needed help. Until my daughter-in-law decided I wasn't prestigious enough to attend my own grandson's 10th birthday celebration. But the day she had to tell 60 guests that the luxury science museum venue had been mysteriously double-booked, her face turned whiter than her designer blazer. She had no idea that while I was knitting sweaters and baking cookies, I was also the anonymous donor who funded the entire children's wing they'd planned to celebrate in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined my golden years would be filled with such family drama. At 73, when most of my friends were enjoying peaceful retirement cruises and book clubs, I was navigating the treacherous waters of modern family politics. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs years ago, but like most mothers and grandmothers, I chose to overlook the small slights in favor of family harmony. My name is Margaret Sullivan. For 42 years, I built and ran Sullivan's Fine Bakery in the heart of Oak Ridge, a charming suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. I started with nothing but my grandmother's sourdough starter and a small loan from the local credit union. By the time I retired, my bakery had 3 locations, 38 employees, and a reputation for the finest wedding cakes in the Midwest. Our signature Ukrainian Easter bread, Paska, had been featured in regional magazines, and our butter cookies shipped to customers in all 50 states. I loved every minute of building that business. The pre-dawn hours mixing dough and peaceful, solitude, the satisfaction of perfectly executed pastries, the joy on customers' faces when they took their first bite of something I had created with my own hands. I'd wake at 3:30 each morning, tiptoe past my sleeping family, and head to the original bakery location where I'd work alongside my early shift staff, my fingers moving with practiced precision as we prepared for the day ahead. By the time the doors opened at 6 to 5, the cases would be filled with fresh pastries, the air rich with the scent of bread and cinnamon. When I finally sold the business to my most talented baker, Maria Delgado, at age 68, I left with not just financial security, but a legacy I was proud of. Maria had started as a 19-year-old college student, working part-time to pay her tuition. She had shown such natural talent that I'd taken her under my wing, teaching her every recipe, every technique I'd developed over the decades. When she approached me about buying the business, it felt right, like passing a cherished family heirloom to a worthy successor. My husband Richard had passed away 10 years earlier, a sudden heart attack while tending his beloved vegetable garden. I'd found him among his tomato plants, trowel still in hand, face peaceful as though he'd simply decided to take a rest in the summer sunshine. We'd had one child, our son James, who had followed a more conventional path than my entrepreneurial journey. He'd become an accountant, married an ambitious pharmaceutical sales representative named Vanessa, and settled in Shaker Heights, an upscale neighborhood on the other side of Cleveland. James had always been a cautious child, methodical where I was intuitive, preferring structure and certainty to the risks I embraced when building my business. When Richard died, James worried about me continuing to work such long hours at the bakery. "Mom, you don't have to keep pushing yourself so hard," he'd say during our Sunday dinners. "You could sell now, live comfortably." But he didn't understand that the bakery wasn't just work to me. It was my passion, my identity, my connection to a heritage that stretched back through generations of women who had fed their families and communities with their own hands. James and Vanessa had 2 children, Tyler, now 10, and Sophia, 7. Beautiful, bright kids who I adored with every fiber of my being. Tyler had inherited Richard's thoughtful nature and my creative streak, a combination that made him excel at both mathematics and art, an unusual pairing that his teachers frequently commented on. Sophia was a natural athlete with a competitive drive that sometimes took her parents by surprise. Where it came from was no mystery to me. I recognized in her the same determination that had carried me through the lean early years of my business when conventional wisdom said a woman-owned bakery couldn't succeed in our conservative community. When James and Vanessa both pursued demanding careers, I was happy to help with childcare, school pickups, and doctor's appointments. I'd built my business while raising James alone after Richard died. I understood the challenges of balancing work and family. The bakery had taught me efficiency, patience, and the art of juggling multiple tasks without dropping any of them, skills that transferred perfectly to helping with my grandchildren. The early years were wonderful. James appreciated my help, and while Vanessa was always a bit distant, she was polite and seemed grateful for the practical support. I picked the children up from preschool 3 days a week, prepared healthy dinners that would be waiting when James and Vanessa returned from work, and never interfered with their parenting decisions, even when I disagreed with them. When Vanessa insisted on expensive language immersion programs for both children before they could even properly speak English, I kept my doubts to myself. When James wanted to enroll 4-year-old Tyler in competitive chess lessons that left the boy in tears of frustration, I gently suggested alternatives without undermining his authority. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," James would say, hugging me as he came through the door after a long day of client meetings. "I don't know how we'd manage without you." Those words warmed my heart, reminding me of the days when a small James would wrap his arms around my flour-covered apron, face pressing against my hip as he declared my chocolate chip cookies the best in the universe. The bond between us had weathered his teenage rebellion, his college years away, his early marriage when Vanessa had seemed determined to establish her primacy in his life. Through it all, we had maintained a connection that, while sometimes strained, remained fundamentally intact. The children thrived with the consistency of having their grandmother as a regular presence in their lives. Tyler inherited my passion for baking. Standing on a step stool in my kitchen by age 4, his small hands covered in flour as he learned to make the simple butter cookies my grandmother had taught me to make decades earlier. I'd watch him concentrate, tongue caught between his teeth, as he carefully pressed a fork into each dough ball, creating the crosshatch pattern that was our family tradition. Sophia was more like her father, methodical, precise, with a mind for numbers that impressed even her teachers. She approached our baking sessions like science experiments, insisting on measuring ingredients to the exact gram, recording her observations in a notebook she kept specifically for Grandma's kitchen research. Every year since they were born, I had organized and privately funded their birthday celebrations. Nothing extravagant at first, backyard parties with homemade cakes and simple games. But as the children grew and Vanessa's career advanced, the parties became increasingly elaborate. For Tyler's 7th birthday, I'd arranged a dinosaur-themed party complete with a paleontologist from the Natural History Museum who brought fossil specimens for the children to handle. For Sophia's 5th, we'd transformed the backyard into an enchanted forest with twinkling lights, a professional face painter, and a children's theater troupe performing fairy tales. I never told James or Vanessa that I was covering these expenses. James assumed the costs came from the generous family fun budget I had established for the grandchildren shortly after selling my business. Vanessa simply took it for granted that these celebrations materialized as planned, occasionally taking credit for aspects she had minimal involvement in. What mattered to me was seeing the joy on my grandchildren's faces, preserving the magic of childhood that passes all too quickly. "Grandma, this is the best birthday ever," Tyler had exclaimed. Last year, his face smeared with chocolate from the fountain I'd rented for his dinosaur party. "You always make everything special." Those moments, those genuine expressions of delight and appreciation, were worth every penny, every hour of planning, every effort to coordinate vendors and activities without letting James and Vanessa realize the extent of my involvement. I wasn't looking for credit or recognition. The children's happiness was enough. The dynamic began to shift when Vanessa received a significant promotion 3 years ago, becoming regional sales director for a major pharmaceutical company. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, a company car, and most significantly, a new social circle that Vanessa seemed determined to impress. Suddenly, our modest family gatherings were replaced by networking events thinly disguised as social functions. New neighbors appeared at Thanksgiving dinner, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they were potential business connections. James's quiet accounting practice was suddenly being marketed to Vanessa's wealthy colleagues. I watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. On one hand, Vanessa's success was impressive, a testament to her intelligence and drive. On the other, the values that had anchored our family seemed to be shifting beneath our feet, replaced by a preoccupation with status and appearance that made me increasingly uncomfortable. And my role began to change as well. Rather than the grandmother who contributed her time, experience, and silent financial support, I became something of an embarrassment, a reminder of the family's less polished roots. The first time I noticed this shift was at a dinner party Vanessa hosted for her new boss. I'd arrived early to help with preparations, bringing a tray of my special Ukrainian pastries that had always been popular at family gatherings. "Oh," Vanessa said, her smile tightening as she took the tray. "Thank you, Margaret, but I've ordered catering from Bellissimo's. Perhaps we can serve these another time." The pastries, hand-rolled dough filled with sweet cheese and topped with cherries I'd preserved myself, disappeared into the kitchen, replaced by bland but elegantly presented hors d'oeuvres that cost 4 times as much and contained half the love. "Mom, would you mind not mentioning the bakery when the Richardsons come over?" James asked hesitantly, before another dinner party several weeks later. "Vanessa thought maybe you could say you were in food service management instead." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I had never been ashamed of building a successful business from scratch, of the years spent with flour-dusted hands and a sore back from standing at the ovens. Sullivan's Bakery had put James through college without a single student loan, had funded family vacations and his first car, had provided security when other families struggled during economic downturns. But I loved my son and wanted him to be happy, so I played along. That night, when asked about my career by Vanessa's new colleagues, I smiled and spoke vaguely about overseeing operations for a local food business, watching the relief spread across my son's face. The requests continued, small but significant adjustments to my identity to make me more palatable to Vanessa's new social circle. My Ukrainian heritage, which had informed the specialty breads that became Sullivan's Bakery's signature offerings, was downplayed. The family recipes that had sustained us through generations, that connected us to relatives long gone, but not forgotten, were replaced by trendy fusion cuisine that Vanessa found more impressive for her guests. My modest wardrobe was subtly criticized until I found myself shopping for clothes I didn't particularly like, just to avoid Vanessa's disapproving glances. "Margaret, we're going to the country club on Sunday," she would text. "Perhaps something a bit more current?" The dresses I chose were never quite right. Too colorful, too conservative, too ethnic, too something. Eventually, I took to asking for explicit approval before family gatherings, a humiliating practice that reduced me to a teenager seeking permission rather than a grown woman with decades of life experience. "Grandma, why does Mom say you need to dress differently when her work friends come over?" Tyler asked me one afternoon as I helped him with his science project. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. "Your mom wants to make a good impression," I answered carefully. "Sometimes, people judge others by how they look, not who they are. It's not right, but it happens." Tyler considered this, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "I think your clothes are fine, and your cookies are way better than the fancy ones Mom orders from that expensive place." I hugged him then, grateful for the honesty of children, before they learn to filter their thoughts through the lens of social expectation. "That's because my cookies have a secret ingredient," I told him with a wink. "What is it?" he asked, eyes wide. "Love," I answered, tapping his nose gently. No, Fancy Bakery can replicate that. What James and Vanessa didn't know, what no one knew except my attorney and financial advisor, was that the sale of Sullivan's Bakery had left me far more comfortable than anyone suspected. I had built the business methodically over 4 decades, reinvesting profits, expanding strategically, and developing a wholesale division that supplied restaurants throughout the Midwest. The property values in our once modest neighborhood had skyrocketed as Cleveland experienced an urban renaissance, making the real estate portion of the sale particularly lucrative. When I finally sold to Maria, the final valuation had surprised even me. Martin Holloway, my attorney since Richard's death, had structured the sale to minimize taxes and maximize long-term security. "You're sitting on a gold mine, Margaret," he told me as we reviewed the final paperwork. "You could buy that villa in Tuscany you're always talking about and still have plenty left over." But the villa remained a dream, a someday plan that never quite materialized. Instead, I lived modestly and focused on using my unexpected wealth in quieter ways. Beyond supporting my grandchildren's celebrations, I had made anonymous donations to causes I believed in. The children's reading room at the Oak Ridge Public Library bore a plaque thanking an anonymous local business owner. The scholarship fund at the Culinary Institute that had helped Maria further her education received annual contributions from a donor who requested no recognition. And the science wing at the Cleveland Natural History Museum, Tyler's favorite place in the world, had been partially funded by a donation in memory of Richard, who had loved taking James there on weekends when he was a boy. The museum donation had been particularly meaningful. Richard had been a science teacher before his heart condition forced early retirement, his passion for the natural world infectious to anyone who spent time with him. When the museum's development director approached me about contributing to their expansion campaign, I'd immediately thought of the hours Richard had spent with James, patiently explaining everything from dinosaur migration patterns to the life cycle of monarchs. The substantial donation had been made under a simple condition: that a small plaque near the hands-on geology exhibit would read, "In memory of Richard Sullivan, who taught us to look closer." No mention of the amount, no grand gestures, just a quiet acknowledgement of a man who had found wonder in the world and shared it generously. I lived simply in the same 3-bedroom ranch house Richard and I had purchased when James was a toddler. The kitchen had been renovated, a professional-grade oven and marble countertops my one concession to luxury, but otherwise, the house remained much as it had been when Richard was alive. I drove a 5-year-old Subaru, wore clothes from department stores rather than boutiques, and saved my splurges for travel. Quiet, solo trips to Europe where I could explore bakeries and pastry shops, gathering ideas I still shared with Maria for the business that would always hold a piece of my heart. These trips were my secret indulgence, carefully scheduled around family obligations and presented to James and Vanessa as modest senior tour packages rather than the curated culinary explorations they actually were. Last year's 3 weeks in the French countryside, studying with a master baker in a 300-year-old village, had been described to them as a senior's bus tour of Paris. Technically not a lie, as I had indeed taken a bus at one point and had visited Paris briefly. The deception bothered me, but experience had taught me that transparency would only lead to uncomfortable questions and subtle disapproval. My financial advisor, Paul Berenson, had been urging me for years to enjoy more of my wealth. "Margaret, you've earned this," he would say during our quarterly meetings, his silver-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose as he reviewed my accounts. "The business has been sold for 5 years now. You've set aside more than enough for James." And the grandchildren. When are you going to do something for yourself? Something visible? Something significant? I would smile and assure him that my simple life was exactly what I wanted. The truth was more complicated. After 40 years of 4 a.m. wake-ups and 16-hour workdays, the quiet rhythm of retirement suited me. I didn't need luxury or recognition. But I did need to feel valued, to be treated with basic dignity and respect, something that was becoming increasingly rare in my interactions with Vanessa. "You know, Margaret," Paul said during our last meeting, closing my portfolio with a decisive snap, "money isn't just about purchasing power. It's about agency, the freedom to make choices on your own terms. You've earned that freedom. Don't let anyone take it from you." His words had stayed with me, resonating in unexpected moments, when Vanessa forgot to invite me to Sophia's dance recital until the day before, when James called to cancel our standing Sunday brunch because something came up with Vanessa's work, when I arrived at their house for a planned visit, only to discover they had decided to go to the lake house owned by Vanessa's new colleague. The final straw, the moment that forced me to reassess everything, came 6 weeks before Tyler's 10th birthday. I had arrived at their house for my regular Wednesday afternoon with the children, only to find Vanessa hosting a lunch for what appeared to be colleagues from her company. The dining room table was set with china I'd never seen before, and the house smelled of catered food rather than Vanessa's usual quick prep meals. "Oh, Margaret," Vanessa said when she spotted me in the entryway, her surprise quickly masked with a tight smile. "I completely forgot you were coming today. The children have activities after school. They won't be home until 6. This was news. To me. Wednesday afternoons had been grandma time since Tyler started kindergarten, a sacred block on our calendars where I would pick the children up from school, help with homework, and engage in craft projects or baking sessions that gave James and Vanessa a few extra hours to focus on work. "I thought Tyler had Science Olympiad on Thursdays," I said, confused. "And Sophia's ballet is always on Monday." Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We've adjusted their schedules. James was supposed to let you know." From the dining room, a woman's voice called out, "Vanessa, are you coming back? We were just discussing the charity gala." Vanessa glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "I need to get back to my guests. Maybe call next time before coming over?" I nodded, swallowing the hurt that rose in my throat. "Of course. Sorry to interrupt." As I turned to leave, I heard the woman ask, "Who was that? Your housekeeper?" And Vanessa's response, not quite quiet enough, "No, just my mother-in-law. She gets confused about schedules sometimes." Just her mother-in-law. Gets confused. As if I were suffering from dementia rather than following the schedule that had been in place for years. As if my time had no value, my feelings no importance. As if the woman who had helped raise her children, who had silently funded their extravagant parties and activities, who had stepped back to let Vanessa take credit for my efforts, was nothing more than an inconvenient elderly relative who couldn't keep track of days. The words stung with a particular sharpness because they attacked the core of who I was, the organized, efficient businesswoman who had run a complex operation with dozens of employees, hundreds of orders, and exacting production schedules for decades. I had built my reputation on reliability and attention to detail. To be dismissed as confused was not just hurtful, but fundamentally untrue. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the sound of my own breathing as I processed what had happened. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a decision had crystallized in my mind. Something needed to change. I would always love my grandchildren, would do anything for them. But I would no longer accept being treated as an inconvenience, an embarrassment, or worst of all, just a mother-in-law who could be dismissed without thought. That evening, I called Paul Berenson. "Paul," I said when he answered, "remember how you've been telling me to do something for myself? I think I'm ready to have that conversation." His delight was audible. "About time, Margaret. What did you have in mind? That villa in Tuscany you mentioned? A cruise? Your own apartment in New York for those bakery research trips?" "Not exactly," I replied. "I need your help with something a bit more complicated." Explained my idea. A plan that would allow me to maintain my relationship with my grandchildren while establishing clear boundaries with James and Vanessa. A way to reclaim my dignity without punishing the children for their parents' behavior. It's risky, Paul cautioned after hearing me out. It could backfire, create more tension instead of resolution. I know, I acknowledged, but I've spent my entire life playing it safe, putting others first. At 73, I think I've earned the right to stand up for myself, even if it's uncomfortable. What I didn't tell Paul, couldn't quite articulate even to myself, was the deep hurt behind my decision. It wasn't just Vanessa's dismissive attitude or James's increasing distance. It was the gradual erosion of my identity, the subtle message that the woman who had built a business from nothing, who had raised a son alone after being widowed at 48, who had supported their family in countless seen and unseen ways, was now an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person to be respected. That hurt had been simmering for years. Now it would finally lead to action. And the catalyst would be Tyler's upcoming birthday, the celebration I had already quietly arranged and paid for months in advance at the Cleveland Natural History Museum in the very science wing that bore Richard's memorial plaque. Sometimes the kindest souls harbor the most effective lessons when finally pushed too far. I was about to demonstrate exactly that. The weeks following my decision to take action were deceptively normal. I continued my routine visits with the grandchildren, though I noticed Vanessa had rescheduled several of our standing arrangements to times when she knew I had my weekly bridge club or volunteer shifts at the library. It was a subtle form of control, creating conflicts that would reduce my time with Tyler and Sophia without having to directly tell me I wasn't welcome. James called less frequently, our Sunday brunches now a monthly occurrence rather than weekly. When I asked about Tyler's upcoming birthday, he was evasive. "Vanessa's handling all the details this year, Mom," he said, his voice carrying that slightly strained quality I'd come to recognize as discomfort. "She's got some big plans." "I'd be happy to help," I offered, knowing full well that I had already done more than help. "I've arranged the last 9 birthdays, after all." "I know, and we appreciate it," James replied quickly. "But Vanessa wants to take this one on herself. She's got some contacts through work that are making it really special." The irony of this statement would have been amusing if it weren't so hurtful. The contacts he referred to were almost certainly the museum administrators I'd been working with for months to arrange Tyler's celebration. But I simply said, "That's wonderful. 10 is a big milestone. He deserves something special." What I didn't mention was that 6 months earlier, I had contacted the Cleveland Natural History Museum's events coordinator, Diane Levinson, to book their new interactive dinosaur exhibition space for Tyler's birthday. The space was normally reserved for corporate events and fundraisers, with a rental fee that would make most parents balk. But as one of the anonymous benefactors of the science wing, I had both the means and the relationships to secure it for a children's party. "Mrs. Sullivan, we'd be delighted to host your grandson's celebration," Diane had told me. "After everything you've done for the museum, it's the least we can do." I had spent weeks planning with the museum staff to create an experience Tyler would never forget. A private tour of the fossil collection normally closed to the public, a custom dinosaur-themed cake from Cleveland's most exclusive bakery, AIE, noted paleontologist flying in from Chicago to give a child-friendly talk about recent discoveries in the field. Small touches that would make the day magical not just for Tyler, but for his friends as well. Personalized lab coats with each child's name, authentic excavation tools they could take home, professional photographs documenting the day. All of it arranged in the wing bearing Richard's memorial plaque, a connection to the grandfather Tyler had never met, but whose love of science lived on in the boy's boundless curiosity. Now, according to James, Vanessa was handling all the details and taking credit for arrangements she knew nothing about. It stung, but I'd grown accustomed to such slights over the years. What I didn't yet know was that this birthday would involve far more than the usual appropriation of my efforts. 3 weeks before the party, I received a text message from Vanessa that would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. It arrived on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing a shopping list for the week. "Margaret, we need to discuss Tyler's birthday plans. Can you meet for coffee tomorrow at 10? The formality of the message, coupled with the unusual request for a one-on-one meeting, set alarm bells ringing. Vanessa and I rarely met without the children present, and when we did, it was typically in the context of family gatherings with James as a buffer. Still, I replied with a simple, "Yes, see you at Westlake Cafe," our usual meeting spot halfway between our homes. The cafe was busy when I arrived the next morning, but Vanessa had secured a table in the back corner, partially screened by a decorative divider that offered some privacy from the other patrons. She was dressed in her work attire, a tailored navy suit, subtle pearl earrings, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. The image of professional success. "Margaret, thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the chair opposite her. No hug, not even a warm smile, just the polite acknowledgement one might offer a business associate. "Of course," I replied, signaling to the server for my usual tea. "What's on your mind?" Vanessa took a careful sip of her latte before setting it down with precision. "It's about Tyler's birthday celebration. As James probably mentioned, we're having it at the Natural History Museum." He did mention that. It sounds wonderful. Tyler loves that museum. Yes, he's very excited. It's going to be quite an event. She paused, fingers nervously adjusting her napkin. "We've invited some important people. Dr. Callahan, the head of pediatric medicine at Cleveland General, the Westbrooks from the hospital board, several of the partners from James's firm." I nodded, waiting for her to get to the point. This sounded like the usual status-focused guest list Vanessa preferred these days. "The thing is," she continued, her voice lowering slightly, "this is a really important networking opportunity for both of us. Dr. Callahan rarely attends private functions, and the Westbrooks could be instrumental in James landing the hospital's accounting contract." "I'm sure Tyler will charm them all," I said, still not seeing where this was heading. "He's such a personable boy." Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand reached across the table, stopping just short of touching mine. A gesture of false compassion that sent a chill of premonition through me. "Margaret, I think it would be best if you didn't attend the party itself." The words hung in the air between us, so unexpected that for a moment I thought I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "It's nothing personal," she hurried to add, though of course, it was entirely personal. "It's just that we're trying to present a certain image, and I'm concerned that some of your stories about the old bakery days might not create the impression we're hoping for." I sat very still, my tea forgotten. "You don't want me at my own grandson's birthday party because I might mention that I owned a business?" "It's not just that," Vanessa sighed, as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "Last time you were around Dr. Callahan, you spent 20 minutes telling him about Ukrainian Easter bread traditions. And when the Westbrooks were over for dinner, you kept offering to teach their daughters how to make pierogies. I didn't realize sharing family traditions was embarrassing," I said quietly. "It's not that it's embarrassing exactly." Vanessa's tone suggested it was precisely that. "It's just not the sophisticated impression we need to create. These people expect a certain level of refinement." The irony was almost laughable. Vanessa, whose idea of cultural sophistication was ordering expensive wines she couldn't pronounce correctly, was concerned that my decades of craftsmanship and cultural heritage would somehow embarrass her in front of people she was desperate to impress. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "And what does James think about this arrangement?" A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "He understands the importance of these connections for our family's future." Translation: She had convinced my son to exclude his own mother from his child's celebration for the sake of impressing people whose opinion of them was based entirely on appearances. We thought, Vanessa continued, seemingly encouraged by my calm reaction, that you could have a special grandmother celebration with Tyler the weekend after. Something small at your house, perhaps? You could bake with him. He always enjoys. That? The dismissal was so complete, so calculated, that it momentarily took my breath away. I was being relegated to a secondary celebration, hidden away like an embarrassing family secret, while Vanessa used my grandson's birthday, the celebration I had arranged and paid for, as a networking event to advance her social climbing. Took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, using the moment to gather my thoughts. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly what I thought of her transparent manipulation, to reveal that the party she was so proudly claiming credit for had been entirely my creation. But another part, the strategic businesswoman who had successfully navigated 4 decades of challenges, recognized an opportunity. I understand, I said finally, setting down my cup. You're right that these connections are important for your family's future. I wouldn't want to interfere with that. Relief flooded Vanessa's face, her shoulders visibly relaxing. I'm so glad. You understand, Margaret. This really is what's best for everyone. Of course, I smiled, a plan already forming in my mind. Will you at least tell Tyler that I wanted to be there? I'd hate for him to think I chose not to come. Definitely, she assured me, though I doubted she would. We'll tell him you weren't feeling well. At your age, no one will question it. At my age, another casual diminishment, another erasure of my agency and capabilities. I nodded as if this were perfectly reasonable, as if I weren't 73 but 103, barely able to leave my home. Well, I should get going, Vanessa said, gathering her designer handbag. I have a meeting with the museum coordinator at 11. So much to finalize for this party. I'm sure it will be wonderful, I replied. Tyler deserves the very best, as I watched her leave, her confident stride carrying her through the cafe without a backward glance. I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, a deep ache that comes from being rejected by your own family. But alongside it was a newfound resolve. I had spent years accommodating Vanessa's ambitions, James's passivity, their combined willingness to use my resources, while minimizing my presence. No more. I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Paul Berenson, my financial advisor. Paul, I said when he answered, remember that plan we discussed? I need to put it in motion immediately. You certain? He asked, concern evident in his voice. This could change your relationship with James and Vanessa significantly. I'm certain, I replied. It's already changed. They just don't know it yet. The second call was to Diane Levinson at the museum. Diane, it's Margaret Sullivan. I need to make some adjustments to my grandson's birthday arrangements. Of course, Mrs. Sullivan. Is everything all right? There's been a slight change of plans, I said, my voice steady. I'd like to discuss some options. An hour later, I sat in Diane's office at the museum, explaining the delicate situation. As a professional who had worked with donors for decades, she understood the complex family dynamics at play. So you're telling me that your daughter-in-law has no idea you arranged and paid for this entire event? She asked, eyes wide with disbelief. None whatsoever, I confirmed. She believes she's working with the museum through her professional connections. Diane shook her head. Well, that explains a lot. She came in yesterday acting as though she was doing us a favor by hosting her event here. She asked for several costly additions to the package, mentioned her close relationship with the board, and suggested we should be offering her a discount, given her husband's position as an accountant for several prominent Cleveland families. I wasn't surprised. This was Vanessa's standard approach: leverage any connection, however tenuous, to extract maximum benefit while giving minimum appreciation. And now she doesn't want you, our actual benefactor, to attend? Diane continued, indignation rising in her voice. That's outrageous. It is, I agreed. But I'm not going to create a scene or force my presence where it's unwanted. Instead, I'd like to explore other options. Together, we developed a plan that would protect Tyler from disappointment while also establishing clear consequences for James and Vanessa's behavior. The museum would honor the original arrangements. The space was reserved, the paleontologist booked, the special touches ready to make a 10-year-old boy's birthday magical. But there would be some adjustments to reflect the new reality of my relationship with my son and his wife. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Diane asked as we finalized the details. "It's within your rights as the donor and the person who contracted these services, but it will certainly create some complications." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Sometimes complications are necessary for growth." As I left the museum, I felt lighter than I had in years. The anxiety that had plagued me throughout my relationship with Vanessa, the constant worry about saying the wrong thing, wearing the wrong clothes, somehow embarrassing her in front of her precious social connections, had dissipated. In its place was a calm certainty that I was finally standing up for myself, reclaiming the dignity that had been slowly eroded over years of subtle diminishment. I drove home through the familiar streets of Cleveland, passing the original Sullivan's bakery location, now a thriving business under Maria's management. The sign still bore my name, a reminder of the legacy I had built through hard work, determination, and a refusal to be underestimated. Somehow, along the way, I had forgotten those qualities in my relationship with James and Vanessa, had allowed myself to be reduced to a convenient grandmother and occasional checkbook. No more. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the garden Richard had loved so dearly. I sat for a moment in the quiet car, thinking about what lay ahead. There would be anger, confusion, perhaps even temporary estrangement from James. But there would also eventually be understanding, or at least consequences for actions that had been too long without them. I had raised my son to be kind, to value family, to respect the sacrifices of others. Somewhere along the way, under Vanessa's influence and his own desire for a more prestigious life than his baker mother had provided, he had forgotten those lessons. Perhaps it was time for a refresher course. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the photographs of a life well lived. James as a toddler in the bakery, flour dusting his chubby cheeks. Richard and me on our 20th anniversary. Tyler and Sophia at various ages, their faces alight with the joy of childhood. My family, complicated and imperfect, but still mine. I picked up my phone and sent a text to James. "We need to